Welcome to Lessons and Stories. This is the channel where every story carries a lesson. Today we're heading to Moscow, Russia, where the winters last half the year, and the people who survive them develop a very specific kind of spine. We're going to follow Nadezhda Vlasova, 30 years old, a financial analyst married to a man she believed was just struggling, only to find out he wasn't struggling at all. He had a plan. What Igor didn't know is that the night he walked through that airport with his arm around another woman, the last person he needed to see was already standing 10 feet away. Stick around, because this story is full of lessons. But first, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling us what city or state you're watching from. It means the world to us. All right, let's get into the story. Nadezhda Vlasova was 30 years old, and she had short, dark hair, gray eyes, and the kind of stillness that people tend to mistake for indifference, right up until the moment they're sitting across from her in a serious conversation. That's when it becomes clear. The stillness isn't coldness, it's patience. The patience of a woman who knows how to wait for the right moment and has the discipline not to move until it arrives. She worked in the financial control department of a large trading company in Moscow. She had been there 5 years, and in those 5 years, she had built a reputation for one particular skill. She could find an error buried inside a 100-page document in 15 minutes. Not because she was lucky, because she was methodical, because she sat down, opened the file, and read everything twice, sometimes 3 times, while everyone else skimmed and hoped for the best. Her supervisors valued her for what they called her cold head. Her husband, it seemed, valued her for the same reason, though lately she had started to notice that the word valued had quietly been replaced by the word used in the private ledger she kept inside herself. She hadn't written it down anywhere. She didn't need to. She worked with numbers for a living. She recognized when the totals didn't add up. We keep our sharpest tools for work and leave the door to our own house unlocked. That's what 5 years of catching fraud in other people's paperwork will do to a person. Train you to see deception everywhere except right in front of you. Igor Vlasov was 37, 7 years older than his wife, and in the way he carried himself, he made sure you felt every one of those years as an advantage. He owned a small chain of home goods stores, 4 locations in different neighborhoods across Moscow, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, 2 hired managers, and about a dozen salespeople. On the surface, he looked like a man who had built something. Good suits, the habit of talking about his plans as if they had already happened. The ability to walk into any room as if the room had been waiting for him. On the street, in a restaurant, at a gathering, it worked. People responded to it. Nadezhda had responded to it once, 7 years ago. She knew the other side. The late-night conversations about credit. The dark silence that followed phone calls from the bank. The irritation he dressed up as fatigue. She knew the inside of his anxiety the way you know the inside of a house you've lived in for years, every creak in the floor, every corner that doesn't get enough light. But knowing a house doesn't always mean you understand its foundation. They had been together 7 years. The first 3 were good. After that, inertia took over. And here's the thing about inertia. In a marriage, it doesn't feel like a warning. It feels like rest. It feels like the natural settling of 2 people who have moved past the noise of early love and arrived somewhere quieter. You tell yourself, that's what it is. You tell yourself that's maturity, and sometimes it is. And sometimes the quiet is just the sound of something slowly dying that hasn't made its final noise yet. Nadezhda had been telling herself the first story for years. The morning everything changed started with a message from her mother. Irina Viktorovna had written the evening before. "Sweetheart, your father and I have decided to come visit for a few days. We've been missing you. Your father says he hasn't been in the city in a long time and wants to walk through some of his old places." Nadezhda read it twice, put her phone on the charger, lay on her back in the bedroom where she had been sleeping alone for several nights in a row since Igor was away on what he called a business trip, and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Her parents didn't visit often. After her father retired, they had sold their Moscow apartment, moved south, and bought a small house near the sea, the dream they had been carrying their whole lives in a back pocket. Her father disliked the commotion of long trips. Her mother disliked imposing on anyone, including her own daughter. If they had decided to come, they had a reason. And Irina Viktorovna had a particular kind of maternal radar that operated above distance and silence. She always seemed to know not the details, but the direction, the fact that something was off. Nadezhda had never once complained to her parents about her marriage. Not in 7 years. Not out of pride, but out of conviction. What happens inside a family stays inside a family. You don't carry it to the doorstep and air it out. She had believed that fully. She still believed parts of it, but sitting in that bedroom, staring at the ceiling, she was beginning to understand that the belief had cost her more than she had ever calculated. Igor had left for his trip 2 days earlier, big suitcase, businesslike expression. Suppliers in another region, he had said. Negotiations on a new shipment. Could be 3 days, could be a week. He kissed her on the cheek. Quickly, automatically, the way a person touches a door handle on the way out, and got into a taxi. She watched the yellow cab disappear around the corner from the window. Pay attention to that. She felt nothing. And the absence of feeling after 7 years with someone should have been its own kind of alarm. She had trained herself to explain the absence of feeling as fatigue. It was easier than the alternative. She wrote back to her mother and said she would pick them up herself. The flight landed at 6:40 in the evening. She left early to account for Moscow traffic and parking. Moscow traffic deserves its own category of human suffering. The city has a subway system so beautiful, marble stations, cathedral ceilings, chandeliers underground it would make a New York transit worker weep with envy. Above ground, though, completely different civilization. Moscow drivers treat traffic lights as strong suggestions and lane markings as abstract art. Nadezhda left an hour early and arrived with 12 minutes to breathe. The terminal was alive at that hour. Loud, warm, smelling of coffee from the cart near the entrance, and something else, that particular scent that airports carry, a mix of movement and anticipation and quiet dread that is impossible to name, but everyone knows. It's the smell of arrivals and departures happening at the same time, in the same room. Nadezhda got a coffee to go, found a spot near the glass doors of the arrivals hall, and waited. The board showed the flight had landed. Passengers would start coming through in about 20 minutes. If she had known what was about to walk through those doors, she would have stood somewhere else entirely. Anywhere else. She could have waited in the car. She could have sent a text. She could have skipped the coffee and spent those 20 minutes doing absolutely anything that didn't involve facing an arrivals hall in a Moscow airport on that particular Tuesday evening. But she didn't know. So she stood there with her coffee and watched the doors. She stood and watched the first wave of travelers with their rolling luggage, tired faces, happy embraces, children lifted up by both arms, elderly couples moving slowly and saying nothing, because after that many years together, there is nothing left that requires words. She was looking for her mother, small, neatly dressed, in beige, always beige, and her father, tall, straight-backed, with the particular walk of a man who spent decades in city government and never quite left it behind, not even in retirement. She did not find them first. What she found first was a familiar line of shoulders, then a familiar turn of the head, then a face. Igor was standing near the edge of the arrivals hall, slightly apart from the main flow of passengers, in a spot where the crowd thinned out. He was not looking around. He was looking at the woman beside him. She was young, blonde, wearing a short leather jacket, not brown, not black, a warm cognac color with a travel bag on her shoulder. Tall, striking, with the kind of confident posture that either comes from nature or from a lifetime of knowing that eyes follow you and deciding to enjoy it rather than apologize for it. Nadezhda did not know her, had never seen her. But one look was enough to understand. This woman was not a colleague. This was not a business meeting. The woman was saying something to him and laughing. Igor leaned toward her. He reached out and took the travel bag from her shoulder gently, the way you take something from someone when you want them to feel looked after, and then he kissed her, not on the cheek, on the mouth, briefly, but without a trace of caution. The way you kiss someone you love when the world is watching and you don't particularly care. Nadezhda did not move. The coffee in her hand stayed untouched. Her shoulders didn't shift. Her expression didn't change. From where she was standing, she probably looked like a woman waiting for her flight to be called. That stillness, the same one people mistook for coldness, was doing its job now in a way she had never trained it to do. Not in a conference room, not reviewing a spreadsheet. Here, in the middle of a Moscow arrivals hall, watching her husband walk past her marriage without noticing it. Look at the body language here, because it tells you everything. Igor's back was straight, relaxed. His weight shifted toward the woman beside him. He carried her bag the way you carry something, when carrying it is a pleasure, not a duty, not a habit, but an act of tenderness you haven't thought about because it comes naturally. That is not the posture of a man on a business trip. That is the posture of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. And Nadezhda, she stood still, feet planted, chin level, the coffee cup held steady. That is the posture of someone absorbing a shock so deep that the body doesn't bother with the small reactions. No flinch, no gasp, just the stillness that comes right before a foundation shifts. They walked toward the exit, shoulder to shoulder. There was a familiarity in how they moved together, an ease that doesn't arrive after one trip. That is how people walk who have been close for a long time. He carried her bag. It was a small thing, but that small thing hit harder than anything else, because for Nadezhda, he hadn't carried anything in a very long time. Not a bag, not a burden, not a single thing that was hers. Somewhere behind her sternum, something moved. Not pain yet. Something before pain, a dull, almost physical shift, like the floor tilting a few degrees and settling again. But the balance has changed, permanently. She took one step forward, and then a heavy, warm hand came down on her shoulder. "Daughter," her father's voice, calm, low, without a single unnecessary note. She turned. Stanislav Alexeyevich Rudakov was 65 years old, straight spine. A face that had spent a decade in Moscow's city administration, developing a particular kind of composure, the kind that cannot be bought and cannot be performed. It has to be earned, year by year, in rooms full of people trying to read you. He had already seen everything, either before her or at the exact same moment. She could see it in the way he held his hand on her shoulder steady, without trembling, like a man who had already made an internal decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to communicate it. Behind him stood Irina Viktorovna, small and precise in her beige coat, watching her daughter with the particular mix of worry and love that mothers carry in their eyes, even when the rest of the face is composed. She had known something was wrong before the plane landed. She always did. "Papa," Nadezhda started, and she did not recognize her own voice. Too quiet, too thin on that one word. "Daughter," her father repeated. And in that single word he put everything at once. Understanding. A pain he would not display, and something solid underneath all of it, like a decision made without hesitation. "Let me teach him a lesson he will never forget," he said. She looked toward where Igor had been standing. He was moving toward the exit now, back straight. The woman beside him was saying something close to his ear. He was smiling. They passed within 10 feet of Nadezhda. He did not turn around, did not feel a thing, did not notice his wife, his father-in-law, his mother-in-law, none of the people whose presence should have stirred something, even something small, even guilt, nothing. That, honestly, was the worst part of all of it. "If you go over there right now," her father said, stepping close and lowering his voice, "he will say she is a colleague, a business contact. He will say, you imagined it. He'll turn it into a scene you created in a public place, and he'll make you the one who lost control." He paused. "That's how men like that survive. They live off other people's reactions. I've watched them for years." Nadezhda said nothing. She was watching the two figures disappear into the crowd near the sliding glass doors. "We don't need a scene," her father continued, his voice as level as a surveyor's tool. "We need a precise strike, the right place, the right moment. No extra noise." She looked at him. "Papa," she said finally, and this time the voice was steadier. "You just landed." "I did," he agreed, without a trace of irony. "Exactly." He took her arm gently. "So first we find the car. We go home. We eat dinner. And then we talk. Quietly. and about the things that matter. Irina Viktorovna said nothing. She simply put her arms around her daughter, not tight, not dramatic, just long, and held on. Sometimes that is the only thing a mother can offer, and it is also the most necessary thing. Nadezhda did not cry. She stood in the middle of that humming arrivals hall and felt something inside her begin, very slowly, very quietly, to rearrange itself. Not break, rearrange. The way a building comes down, not in an explosion but floor by floor, methodically, without haste. They left through a different set of doors. Igor and the woman with the cognac bag were already gone. Nadezhda did not look for them. She found her car in the parking garage, loaded her parents' luggage into the trunk, and sat behind the wheel for a moment. The garage was nearly empty in that corner. A few cars, a lamp casting pale yellow light on the concrete. "Did you know?" her mother asked from the back seat. "No," Nadezhda said. It was the truth. There had been sensations, something off in his tone over the past several months. Too many, "I'll be late tonight's," a gradual disappearance of the questions he used to ask about her life. The small daily details that signal a person is actually paying attention to you. But she had not known. She had not wanted to know. That was also the truth, and she was only now allowing herself to say it clearly, even if only inside her own head. "Good," her father said from the passenger seat. He did not explain what he meant. Not yet. The drive home was quiet. Her father looked out at the boulevards and the lit storefronts with the focused attention of someone assessing a situation rather than revisiting a memory. He had not been in Moscow in several years, but he did not look nostalgic. He looked alert. Her mother kept one hand lightly on Nadezhda's shoulder from the back seat, applying the gentlest pressure at the turns, saying nothing at all. Sometimes nothing is the right conversation. Nadezhda drove and thought about how the morning had begun completely normally. Coffee, inbox, a grocery list, a fish she had planned to bake for her father. When they pulled up to the building, her phone buzzed. A message from Igor. "Hey, having dinner with the partners. Negotiations in the morning. We'll call after. Miss you." If she had known, 2 hours earlier, that this message was coming, that the man who had just kissed another woman in the arrivals hall would end his evening with "miss you," she might have stayed home, baked the fish, and let her parents take a cab. But that's airports for you. They always save the best surprises for last. She read it, put the phone in her bag, got out and opened the trunk. "I've got it," her father said, and took both bags without discussion. He walked to the entrance at the same pace he always walked, straight back, unhurried, with the expression of a man whose opinion of his son-in-law had just been revised downward so completely that there was nowhere left to revise it. The next evening, Igor called. Wednesday, around 8, Nadezhda was clearing the dinner table. Her mother was at the sink. Her father was in the armchair by the window with a cup of tea and his phone, reading something. When Igor's name lit up the screen, Nadezhda paused for just a moment, then picked up and walked quietly into the hallway. She pulled the door shut behind her, stood against the wall, raised the phone to her ear. "Hey," said Igor, the voice of a man who was tired but holding it together. "Hey," she answered. "How are you doing over there?" "Fine," she said. Even, flat, not warmer or cooler than it had been for months. "Negotiations are rough. The suppliers keep stalling, can't agree on price. Might need another day or two. I'm exhausted." He paused. "You don't miss me?" "I'm managing," she said. Not warm, not cold. Exactly as she had spoken to him for the last several months. The two of them, exchanging words that carried the shape of a conversation, but none of the weight. She listened to his voice and thought about how effortlessly he lied. No hesitation, no pause, no micro-catch in the throat, no shift in rhythm. The voice of a man who had been doing this for a long time and had long since stopped noticing the effort. He wasn't performing. He had moved past performance into something worse. Routine. "All right, I'll call tomorrow. Good night." "Good night," she said, and ended the call. She stood in the dark hallway with the phone in her hand. He had not asked how her day went, had not asked whether she had eaten, had not asked if anything had happened. He had called, checked a box in his internal list of required actions called the wife, done and moved on. That was the whole of it. She put the phone in her pocket and went back to the kitchen. Him? Her mother asked quietly, without turning from the sink. Him, Nadezhda confirmed, and picked up the dish towel. Her father said nothing. He had already reached his conclusions on his own, and from the look of it, he had reached them with finality. Irina Viktorovna turned off the water and turned to her daughter, looked at her for a long moment without words. Then she stepped forward and hugged her brief, firm, the kind of hug that says, I see you, and I'm not going anywhere, and I won't make this worse with words. Then she let go. Nadezhda did not cry. Not that night either, and not because there was nothing to cry about. Tears require a loosening of control, and she could not afford that yet. Not now. She went to the bathroom, washed her face, stood at the mirror for a long time, 30 years old, 7 of them beside a man she thought she knew. Or knew and had chosen not to examine too closely, which was not the same thing at all. The water ran cold down her face. In the mirror, a woman looked back at her direct-eyed, jaw set, not broken, reassembling, slowly, without noise. Thursday morning, before she left for work, her father asked her to stay a few minutes. They sat together at the kitchen table. Irina Viktorovna had not yet come out. Stanislav Alexeyevich spoke the way he always spoke about serious things, without preamble, without emotion loading up the sentences, without anything extra. The apartment, he began. It's in your name. Yes, said Nadezhda. Your gift. The deed of donation. I'm the sole owner. Igor isn't in any of the property documents. He's registered as a resident, but he has no ownership rights. Her father nodded the short nod of a man confirming what he already suspected. Have you signed anything in the last year? A guarantee? A pledge? A shared credit application? A power of attorney? Nadezhda shook her head. He brought it up several times, talked about refinancing the business, said a joint loan would get better rates, that banks respond better to 2 incomes. Once he suggested putting the apartment up as collateral, a technical step. He called it 2 or 3 months, and we lift the lien. It's nothing. I kept stalling. Every time, I said I needed more time. I wanted an independent consultation first. He got irritated, but he didn't push hard. He held back. A pause settled over the table. Here's something worth knowing about Russian property law. An apartment received as a gift through a formal deed of donation is personal property. Even if you get married afterward, it doesn't become marital property. In a divorce, the other spouse has no claim to it. Back home in the States, gifts and inheritances are similarly protected in most states, as long as you haven't mixed them with joint funds. What was given to you stays with you, which is exactly why Nadezhda's father had made sure, 7 years ago, that the deed was in her name alone. Good that you kept stalling, her father said, and set his cup down on the table. This wasn't just a husband asking for help with his finances. This was a plan, deliberate and methodical. He picked up his phone. There is a man I have trusted for many years. His name is Arkady Zemlyakov. He is a financial consultant. He understands debt structures, credit risk, and bankruptcy mechanics better than most bank analysts I encountered in 30 years of public service. I'm going to ask him to look at the real state of your husband's business through public sources, through legally available commercial information, only what is already visible to anyone who looks carefully. Nadezhda looked at him. Papa, you arrived 2 days ago. I did, he agreed, without a hint of irony. But I've known you your whole life, and I've been watching this man from a distance for 7 years. I had time to think. Some things about him concerned me from the very beginning, even when he first came to meet us, before you were married. I said nothing. I didn't want to pressure you. I think now that was a mistake. There was nothing to argue with in that. You can't dispute the past. It only moves in one direction. Arkady Zemlyakov arrived on Friday afternoon. Nadezhda had taken a half-day from work, sitting at her desk through the morning, pretending everything was normal, had been possible but costly, and by noon she had understood that if she stayed until 5, she would simply run dry. She worked in automatic through the morning, opened spreadsheets, checked figures, answered emails, shared a cup of tea with a colleague at 3, and held up her end of a conversation about nothing. No one noticed anything. She was very good at not showing. Arkady turned out to be a compact, solid man around 40, in a light button-up shirt, no tie, with a folder tucked under his arm, and the manner of someone who has no need to make an impression because results do the talking. He greeted everyone briefly, sat down at the table, opened the folder, and without any introduction, began. Igor Vlasov's chain of home goods stores consisted of 4 retail locations spread across different neighborhoods of Moscow. On paper, a functioning small business with a reported turnover. In reality, a structure that was not sustained by actual profit, but by the constant rotation of obligations, new debts covering old ones, new credit lines, buying time before previous ones came due. The architecture of a man swimming faster and faster just to keep his head above water and telling everyone on shore he's out for a leisurely swim. 2 of his main suppliers had outstanding overdue claims. Negotiations for extended payment terms had been dragging on for months and going nowhere. The credit line with his bank was nearly maxed out. The remaining available balance was minimal. The warehouse on the outskirts, the one that held his entire inventory operation, was rented at a favorable rate, whose term was expiring in 2 months, and the landlord had already signaled he would not renew at the same conditions. And there was one more element. Igor had been in talks with a potential investor for several weeks, someone who might come in with real money and buy time. The investor had not yet given an answer. He was asking for documentation, reviewing figures, taking his time. "This isn't just a rough patch?" Nadezhda asked. Arkady shook his head. "A rough patch is when you're temporarily short on cash, but you have a path forward and a reserve to lean on. That's not what this is. There is no reserve. There is no financial cushion. There is no credible plan for reaching profitability. The business operates by continuously attracting new money to close previous obligations. That works until the moment one creditor refuses to wait. When that happens, the whole structure starts coming apart quickly, and it doesn't stop." "Does he understand his own position?" her father asked. "He can't not understand it," Arkady said. "A man who has run a business for several years sees his own numbers. The question is not whether he knows. The question is what he intends to do about it." He looked at Nadezhda directly, without softening it. "And based on what you've described, the repeated conversations about the apartment, the joint loan, the collateral, the guarantees, he had a plan. A specific sequential plan to close the worst holes using his wife's resources, her property, her income, her signature." The kitchen went quiet. Outside, the sounds of the courtyard drifted in. Children's voices, music from an open window somewhere, a building door slamming shut. A perfectly ordinary warm evening, completely unaware of anything. Nadezhda looked at the papers spread in front of her, numbers she recognized, not the specific ones, but the shape of them. She had spent 5 years learning to read exactly this kind of architecture. The gap between what the documents say and what the documents mean. She had just never expected to find it here, at her own table, inside her own marriage. She had spent months interpreting his pressure as the clumsy way a proud man asks for help. She had seen the pushing as awkwardness. She had explained the urgency as fear. The numbers on the table now explained what the words had always carefully avoided explaining. There was no awkwardness. There had never been any. There was a strategy, precise and patient. And she had been the asset it was designed around. That's not a husband in trouble. That's a contractor who discovered his best available resource lives in the next room. "Is the apartment at risk?" she asked. "No," her father said firmly before Arkady could answer. "You signed nothing. The apartment came to you by deed of donation before the marriage. It is your personal property. It is not part of the marital estate. In a divorce, he has no grounds to claim it. I will have a lawyer confirm the specifics, but the position is strong. There is nothing to fear on that front." Nadezhda was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do we do?" Her father and Arkady exchanged a brief look, the kind between 2 people who have already had this conversation and reached an agreement. "Nothing sudden," her father said. "At home, you behave as you always have. You give no indication that you know about the airport. You sign nothing exactly as you've been doing for months, and you wait. For what? For his situation to reach its natural conclusion, Arkady said, in the same level tone he had used for the entire conversation. It will get there on its own. This is a matter of weeks, not months. We don't need to invent anything or create anything. We only need to make sure that the people who should have accurate information, his creditors, his partners, the investor who is still deciding, have access to what is actually true about his business. No fabrication, no interference, just reality, unobstructed. Is that legal? She asked. Completely, her father said, without hesitation, without qualification. And then, more quietly, we are not creating his problems. His problems are real, and they are his. We are simply choosing to stop helping him hide them. Nadezhda looked at this man, her father, who had flown in 2 days ago for a visit and had, in 48 hours, calmly dismantled a structure she had been living inside for years, without fully seeing it. Not because she was blind, because she had trusted, because she had chosen, each time a question formed, to answer it charitably and move on. There is a cost to trusting people who haven't earned it. It doesn't always show up right away. Sometimes it waits patient, quiet, until you're sitting at your own kitchen table with a folder full of someone else's numbers and a father who is saying, very gently, that it's time to stop paying. All right, she said. I'll do it your way. Her mother brought tea, set the cups out without ceremony, sat down next to her daughter, said nothing, just stayed the way. Only someone who loves you without conditions or agenda knows how to stay. Outside, the city moved through its evening. Lights came on in the buildings across the way. Somewhere down the street, the ordinary noise of Moscow continued without interruption. Nothing had changed out there. In here, something had shifted, quiet and irreversible, the way the most important things always do. Her parents left on Saturday morning. They had agreed on this in advance, no extra witnesses in the first days. Let everything look normal. Her father carried his own bag to the taxi without being asked. Her mother held Nadezhda at the door for a moment, said nothing, and let go. They would be reachable. That was enough. Igor came home on Saturday evening. He walked through the door with his travel bag slung over one shoulder and the expression of a man who had spent several demanding days doing important things and was now ready to receive the quiet comfort of home. Satisfied, unhurried. Jacket slightly rumpled in the way that signals productivity rather than carelessness. The whole performance was automatic. At this point, he had been running it so long he no longer needed to think about it. Missed you, he said, and put his arms around Nadezhda in the hallway. You must be exhausted, she said. She did not pull away. She stood inside the embrace and allowed it, and she was quietly surprised by how easy it was. She had expected something, a flinch, a resistance in her body that her body would not be able to conceal. There was nothing, because she was no longer looking at him the way she had looked at him for 7 years. She was looking at him the way she looked at a complicated file on her screen at work. Carefully, without sentiment, with the specific, focused attention of someone who needs to understand the structure before they can begin. That, honestly, takes a particular kind of interior strength. Most people, when they are in pain, show it. They go quiet in the wrong ways. They answer in clipped sentences. They move around the person who hurt them like a room with a piece of furniture they are trying not to bump into. Nadezhda did none of that. She cooked dinner. She asked how the drive had been. She poured tea. She was present, composed, and completely unreachable, and he had no idea. The first week after his return, Igor moved through the apartment with the careful ease of a man who believes everything is under control. He came home from work, gave abbreviated updates about the business, vague, optimistic in tone, short on detail, and changed the subject when specifics were needed. He talked about plans the way he always had, in the confident future tense, as if outcomes were already settled and the steps between here and there were a formality. But Nadezhda noticed the pauses, the small hesitations before answering questions about money, the way he shifted when she asked something too concrete. It was the speech of a man buying time, and she recognized it now with complete clarity, the way you recognize a thing once you've been shown exactly what you're looking for. Meanwhile, Arkady Zemliakov was working, quietly, methodically, without a single phone call that could not be explained, without a single action that crossed any line. Here's what he did. He reached out through existing professional contacts to the commercial director of Igor's largest supplier, a major wholesale warehouse that Igor had worked with for 3 years. Arkady did not fabricate anything. He did not invent figures or spread rumors. He simply, in the course of a conversation between people who know each other in the same industry, mentioned that the financial position of Vlasov's retail network appeared to raise questions, and suggested it might be prudent to request updated solvency documentation before agreeing to any further payment extensions. That was all it took. The commercial director of that warehouse had been in wholesale trade long enough to have watched several confident-sounding small businesses fold at the worst possible moment, taking a chunk of his receivables with them. He did not need convincing. He needed one informed nudge from someone he trusted, and the rest followed from his own professional caution. He requested the documentation. Igor provided it. The documents looked acceptable on the surface. Under a careful eye, they showed exactly what Arkady had described: deferred obligations stacked on top of each other, a cash position that worked only as long as no one demanded anything ahead of schedule. The commercial director made his decision independently. He required partial prepayment on the next order instead of the usual extended terms. For Igor, this was not just a setback. It was a hole in a boat that was already taking on water. The second development came from the warehouse landlord. Arkady had not contacted him directly. He had made a few inquiries through mutual acquaintances in Moscow's commercial real estate circles, and the information had traveled on its own, the way information does in business communities where everyone knows someone who knows someone. The landlord, already aware that the favorable terms he had been offering were due to expire, raised the subject of renewal ahead of schedule and named a new rate, market rate, no discounts. Igor tried to negotiate. He made the promises that men in his position make soon. Things are stabilizing. Give me a little more time. Without financial documentation to back those words, they were just words. The landlord had heard similar words before. He was not moved. The investor was the third piece and the most significant. He had been evaluating Igor's business for over a month. Unlike the others, he had initiated his own independent audit of the operation, hired outside analysts, requested detailed records, and took his time reading everything before drawing conclusions. He was not a man who put money into presentations. He put money into numbers, and the numbers, examined without the benefit of Igor's explanations, layered over them, told a clear and unambiguous story. At the end of the third week after Igor's return, Arkady called Stanislav Alexievich. The investor had sent a formal letter declining to enter the project at this stage. Polite, final, no opening left in the language. Her father called Nadezhda and told her, "So it's close," she said. "Very close. A week, maybe 10 days, perhaps less. When the investor leaves, the others get nervous. That kind of news moves fast in business circles. Every creditor who hears it starts calculating whether they will be first or last to collect, and no one wants to be last." She understood that calculus better than most. "What will he be left with?" "Debts," her father said simply, "and one remaining option he hasn't exhausted yet, which is you. When he comes to you this time, it will be the most serious conversation he has attempted. Be ready." "I'm ready," she said. And she was. That was the part that surprised her most. Not that she was ready, but how calm the readiness felt. Not like armor being strapped on before a fight. More like the quiet of someone who has already done the work and is simply waiting for the moment to arrive. In the days that followed, she watched Igor move through the apartment like a man whose compass had stopped working. He had always been a person who projected forward motion plans, next steps, the next deal, the next negotiation, the next angle. Now he sat on the couch with his phone and scrolled without purpose. He picked up and put down his coffee. He went to the balcony and stood there looking down at the courtyard with the expression of a man running through scenarios and finding that none of them end well. His car sat in the building's lot, unmoved for 3 days. She had noticed that too. He had almost entirely stopped talking about the business, and that silence was the loudest thing in the apartment. The man who used to walk into rooms like he already owned them was now standing on his own balcony, staring at the courtyard below like he was trying to remember what city he lived in. Quite a distance to travel in 3 weeks. Monday morning he was still home at 9, sitting at the kitchen table with his phone, composing messages he deleted before sending. Nadezhda put on her coat, filled her thermos, and caught his eye on the way out. "Will you be late tonight?" "I don't know," she said. "Depends how it goes." He nodded and went back to his phone. The message from Arkady came on Wednesday, mid-morning, while she was at her desk. One sentence. "The bank has officially notified Igor of the cancellation of his credit line." She read it, put her phone in the drawer, went back to the report she was checking, finished the page, then the next one. Then she stood up, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window for 60 seconds looking at the street below. Cars, pedestrians, an ordinary Moscow noon. Then she sat back down and kept working. A canceled credit line for those who want to understand what just happened to Igor. A revolving credit line is what keeps a retail business breathing. It's the float between buying inventory and selling it. No line, no float. No float, no product. No product, no revenue. The bank didn't just say no to a loan. They pulled the floor out. Back home in the States, we'd call this the bank calling the note. It usually means you have 30 days before things get very loud. Igor didn't have 30 days. He had less. That evening he came home for the first time since all of this began in a way that could only be described as broken. He walked in, dropped his keys on the entry table. They slid off and hit the floor. He did not pick them up. He walked past Nadezhda in the doorway of the kitchen and into the living room. He sat down on the couch heavily, without taking off his jacket, and put his head forward and stared at the carpet. Not with the restless energy of someone looking for a solution, with the stillness of someone who has run out of them. Look at that. He didn't even pick up his keys. This was a man who used to walk into rooms like he owned the deed. Pay attention to this moment, because this is the posture of a man who has spent years constructing an image. The man who is always one step ahead, always has another play, always has a plan, and is sitting in the rubble of that image, with nowhere to hide. The jacket still on is important. He didn't even have the energy left to go through the motions of settling in. He just landed, and stayed where he landed. Nadezhda stood in the doorway. She waited. She was very good at waiting. "The bank," he said finally, without lifting his head. "Full cancellation." "I see," she said. He raised his head. Something in her tone caught him. Too even, too composed, not the soft concern he had been counting on. "I see," he repeated. "That's all you have. What would you like me to say?" He stood, walked the length of the room. The nervous energy had come back, the pacing of a man who needs to do something with his body because his mind has nowhere left to go. "Nadezhda, I need your help, for real this time, right now. I'm listening." "The apartment. We put it up, just for 6 months. I take the money, close the most urgent debts, negotiate new terms with the suppliers, find an investor. I just need time. 6 months and it's done. The lien comes off and we're clean." "No," she said. "You didn't even think about it." "I've been thinking about it for a long time. The answer is no." He stopped moving, looked at her, searching her face for something, a crack, an opening, a sign that if he pushed differently he would find a softer answer underneath. "So you're just going to watch everything fall apart?" "I'm not going to put my apartment on the line for debts I didn't create," she said, in exactly the same tone she would have used to explain a discrepancy in a spreadsheet. Neutral, clear, done. "You're my wife, which is exactly why I'm not your guarantor." He turned away, walked to the window, stood there for a moment with his back to her, then turned back. "Then take out a loan, your name, your income. The bank will give you a decent amount. You know that." "No, Nadezhda," his voice rose for the first time. "You cannot stand here and watch this happen. I am telling you, this is our family. This is our life." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't build this, Igor, and it didn't start falling apart today." He went quiet, sat back down on the couch. The fight had gone out of him as quickly as it had come, like air out of something punctured. He sat slumped, jacket still on, and was silent for a long moment, and then he said it. quietly, almost conversationally, as if he were simply adjusting the plan, moving items around a list. Fine, if everything collapses, it collapses. We'll manage. Live off what we have. Your father's been giving you jewelry your whole life. Between the two of us, there's probably a decent amount of diamonds in that safe. We can sell those. You're obligated to help your husband in a difficult situation. That's what marriage is. And by the way, what's the combination? Nadezhda stood very still. And here is what's remarkable about this moment. She had been braced for something. She had known, from the conversation with Arkady, that a final push was coming, more urgent, more direct, more stripped of pretense than everything before. She had prepared herself for it. What she had not prepared for was this particular version of it. Not the cruelty of it exactly. More the casualness, the absence of any packaging. 7 years, and this was the sentence that finally arrived without a coat on. Sell your things. What's the combination to the safe? Not a partner, not a person he loved, an asset he had not yet liquidated. She had thought this moment would come with pain. Instead, what arrived was clarity. The complete, cold, crystalline clarity of a question that has waited years for its real answer and has finally received one. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "I heard you." She walked to the kitchen, pulled the door closed behind her, stood at the sink and looked out the window at the courtyard below. The lamp post was on, yellow, slightly flickering. An old woman sat on a bench with a small dog on a leash. The dog was looking at something off to the side. The most ordinary thing imaginable. Nadezhda took out her phone and typed a message to her father. 2 words. "It's time." The reply came in less than a minute. "Understood. Tomorrow with Arkady. Your mother and I are already on our way." That night she lay awake for a long time, not because she was anxious, because her mind was running clean and fast and clear, the way it ran when she was working through a difficult problem at work, not troubled, focused. What needed to happen? In what order? How? Exactly. Some decisions, once made, don't need to be revisited. They just need to be executed. On Thursday morning, she met Arkady at a small cafe near the hotel where her parents had arrived the previous night. She told him about the conversation with no unnecessary detail, only what was relevant. When she got to the part about the jewelry and the combination to the safe, Arkady said nothing. He lifted his eyebrows slightly for 1 second, the brief expression of a man receiving confirmation of something he had already expected, and let it pass. "Here is where things stand," he said, opening his folder. "The bank has canceled the line. The main supplier is requiring prepayment he can't cover. The landlord is billing at market rate. He has no investor. By my estimate, 2 to 3 weeks before the pressure from creditors becomes something he can no longer manage informally. After that, the formal process begins, and there is no stopping it from the inside without an external source of money, which no longer exists." And Vlada?" Nadezhda asked. For those who lost track, Vlada Soldatova was the young woman from the airport, the one with the cognac-colored jacket and the travel bag. She worked at one of Igor's stores. She had been in this story considerably longer than she had been visible in it. Arkady slid a single sheet across the table. A name, a store location on the north side of the city. He had found it the same way he found everything, through the kind of quiet, methodical attention that most people in a crisis are too distracted to apply. She's been taking longer to return his calls. "I don't have direct information, but the pattern you're describing, a man whose financial presentation has started to crack, tends to produce predictable results in those kinds of arrangements." He didn't say it with judgment. He said it the way a doctor states a prognosis, professionally, based on observed patterns. There's a life lesson in that, and I'm going to say it plainly. A relationship built on what someone appears to have is not a relationship. It's a transaction dressed in nicer clothes. The moment the appearance changes, the transaction ends, and the person who was counting on the appearance in this case, Igor, discovers that what he thought was loyalty was always just arithmetic. "I need a good family law attorney," Nadezhda said. "I have a contact," Arkady said. "She can see you tomorrow at 11 if that works." "It works." The lawyer, was a woman around 40, lean, precise, economical, with words in the way that good lawyers tend to be. They charge by the hour, and they learned long ago that every sentence should earn its place. She listened to Nadezhda without interrupting, asked 4 questions, each targeted and necessary, and then examined the documents, the apartment deed, the registration records, the property registry extract. 20 minutes in, she gave her assessment. The apartment was clean, personal property, deed of donation, no marital claim, no risk. Everything Nadezhda and her father had already understood was now confirmed in the precise, unhurried language of someone who does this for a living and has no reason to dress it up. Did your husband sign anything related to this property at any point? Any agreement? Any power of attorney? Any document connecting him to the ownership of the apartment? Nothing. Then there is no risk to the apartment. None. She explained the process: petition, notification, court date. In Russia, when there are no children and no contested property, the family court moves with surprising efficiency. Back home in the States, a contested divorce can take years and cost both sides a fortune in legal fees, leaving everyone exhausted and broke. The Russian system, in this particular kind of case, does not linger. It simply closes the file. When you're ready to proceed, the lawyer said, standing to see her out, call me. I can have the documents prepared in 2 days. On Friday evening, Igor tried again. This time there was no anger and no pressure. He came to her quietly, spoke softly, with the tone of a man who has cycled through all the other registers and arrived at the last one available to him. Appeal. He had found, he said, a private lender, not a bank, a personal arrangement, a short-term loan. He just needed a co-signature, not collateral, just her name beside his. No, she said. Nadezhda, I'm asking you. I know. No. He was quiet for a moment. Then he went to the other room. 30 minutes later, she heard him on the phone, speaking in a low and compressed voice, the voice of a man having a conversation he did not want overheard. Then silence. He had now worked his way through banks, joint loans, collateral, personal guarantees, jewelry, and private lenders. That is a complete tour of the options. There was no floor below this one. Vlada, in those same days, had arrived at her own conclusions. She was 26 years old and had spent enough time around men with money to understand the difference between a man who has money and a man who performs having money. The performance had started slipping in small ways weeks ago. The trips became shorter. The gifts stopped. The plans they had discussed vague, exciting, full of the kind of detail that sounds substantial until you notice it never has dates attached to it, had grown quieter and then stopped entirely. And his voice on the phone, which had once been the voice of a man who was solving problems, had become the voice of a man being solved by them. She did not call to have a conversation about it. She simply answered his calls more slowly. Sometimes, not at all. She changed her profile picture in the messaging app. The new photo showed her in a restaurant he didn't recognize, beside a man he had never seen, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, with the relaxed posture of someone who has no outstanding debts and no need to explain himself. The message was not subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Vlada was practical. Sentiment was fine when it was affordable. And just between us, the new man in that photo had the quiet, settled look of someone who has never once needed to ask a woman for the combination to her safe. Vlada had done her math. She always did. Saturday passed in near silence. Igor stayed home all day, moving between the couch and the kitchen and the balcony in slow, purposeless loops. He ate without appetite, checked his phone with the repetitive, mechanical motion of someone expecting a call that does not come. He stood on the balcony twice and looked down at the courtyard with an expression Nadezhda had never seen on him before. Not angry, not calculating, just empty. The expression of a man who has run every version of the scenario and found that in all of them, the outcome is the same. Nadezhda worked from the bedroom. She came out for meals and for water. They barely spoke. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of a marriage running on fumes. It was the silence of two people who have both, in their own ways, already left and are simply waiting for the physical reality to catch up with what has already happened internally. She thought about what the apartment would feel like when it was hers alone again. Not lonely. She was clear about that in her own mind. Not an absence, but a presence, the presence of a life that belonged to her, made of her choices, shaped by her decisions, without someone else's crisis running underneath it, like a cracked pipe in the wall. She did not think further ahead than that. It was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough. On Monday evening, she called the lawyer. "I'd like to move forward," she said. Her voice was steady. No hesitation, no pause for breath between the words, the voice of someone who made this decision days ago and is now simply completing the action. "Tomorrow at 10, the lawyer said. "Everything will be ready." She ended the call, sat for a moment in the quiet of the bedroom. Behind the closed door, the television in the living room was changing channels, Igor not watching anything, just filling the silence with sound. She had noticed him doing that more and more. Filling silence with sound because the silence, for him, had become too loud. Notice that detail. A man who once had plans for every hour of the day was now sitting in the dark, flipping through channels he wasn't watching. That is what a person without a next move looks like from the inside. Tuesday morning, she was up before the alarm. She made coffee, stood at the kitchen window and watched the courtyard wake up. A man walked a dog in the pale early light. A woman crossed the yard with a bag of groceries. Pigeons. A single car pulling out of a parking space. The ordinary start of an ordinary day, which was also, quietly, the first day of something different. Igor was still asleep. She dressed without noise, picked up her bag, walked to the door and stepped out, just as she did every morning. Nothing announced, nothing dramatic, just the door clicking shut behind her. At 10 o'clock, she sat in the lawyer's office and picked up a folder. Inside, the petition for dissolution of marriage, a certificate of title to the apartment, a notarized copy of the deed of donation. Everything clean and organized, numbered, ready. The lawyer had already filed the original petition with the court that morning, as they had discussed. Nadezhda held the folder in both hands and looked at the stack of papers for a moment. 7 years of marriage, reduced to standard forms with standard language and official stamps. All of it, the first 3 years that were good, the inertia that followed, the slow erosion of real conversation, the explanations she had invented on his behalf, the charity she had extended past the point where charity made any sense. All of it now existed in the space between a filing date and a court date. It was not a sad thought. It was simply a true one. She let it be true, and then she put the folder under her arm and walked out into the autumn street. She went directly to the hotel where her parents had been staying. Her father opened the door before she could knock twice. He had been ready. Irina Viktorovna was in the chair by the window with a cup of tea, and she looked up with the particular attentiveness of a woman who has been waiting and is now reading her daughter's face for information. Nadezhda came in, sat on the edge of the armchair, looked around the small room, the smell of coffee and fresh newspaper. Her father's old habit of starting the day with print rather than a screen. Certain things about a person that simply never change and are quietly wonderful for that reason. "Tonight," she said. Her father nodded once. "I'll be there, present, but not intervening unless necessary." "It won't be necessary," she said. "I'll handle it." "I know," he said. "That's why I said, unless." Her mother got up and held her briefly, tightly, and without any of the emotion she was clearly containing. The hug of someone who is proud and frightened at the same time and has chosen, for her daughter's sake, to lead with the pride. "How are you?" Irina Viktorovna asked quietly. "Ready?" said Nadezhda. She spent the rest of the afternoon at work. She closed 3 reports that had been sitting unfinished since the previous week. She answered her emails. She drank tea with a colleague at 3 and held up half a conversation about something inconsequential. No one saw anything different in her. She had worn this face for weeks now, the composed, present, professionally capable face, and it had held without cracking. The ability to carry something enormous and invisible while performing the ordinary tasks of a life is not a small thing. It is, actually, one of the most demanding skills a human being can develop. It looks like stillness from the outside. On the inside, it requires constant, quiet work. At 6 in the evening, she left the office and drove to the hotel. Her father was waiting in the lobby, already in his coat. They drove to the apartment in silence. He looked out the window at the Moscow evening, the streets filling with the after-work current of people, the storefronts lit, the yellow glow of apartment windows in the buildings they passed. He said nothing, and his face was entirely composed, the face of a man on his way to do something straightforward. Igor was in the kitchen when she walked in, phone in hand. He looked up, registered her, started to say something routine, and then he saw her father step in behind her. Something shifted in his face. Not fear, more like the specific alertness of a man who recognizes that the geometry of a situation has just changed and hasn't yet calculated what that means. "Stanislav Alexievich," he said, with careful formality. "I didn't know you were in the city." "I've been in Moscow for a while," her father said simply, and walked into the living room. He sat in the armchair by the window, the same one he had occupied every evening during his first visit. When he had stayed in this apartment and read his phone over tea, while Nadezhda cleared the dinner table and Igor called from a city he was not in, he placed his hands on the armrests. His back was straight. His expression said nothing except, "I have time, and I am not going anywhere." Nadezhda remained standing across from her husband. "We need to talk. I'm listening," he said. But his voice had already lost something, that particular low-key confidence that had been its default setting for years. It was still controlled, but thinner, like a signal losing strength. "I know about the airport," she said. 5 weeks ago. I was there to pick up my parents. Their flight came in at 6:40. I was standing at the arrivals hall when you walked through. I saw you, and I saw the woman you were with." She spoke without heat, without accusation in the tone, simply placing facts on the table one at a time, the way she placed documents in a folder. "You took her bag. You kissed her. You left together. My parents were standing next to me. They saw the same thing I did." Igor said nothing. She watched his face cycle through the options: deny, explain, redirect, and find none of them available. "Her name is Vlada Soldatova," Nadezhda continued. "She works at one of your stores. This has been going on for some time. Not a trip. Not a colleague." She paused for exactly one beat. "I also know the state of your business. The suppliers, the bank, the warehouse landlord, the investor who declined last week. I know the actual numbers, not the version you were planning to give me. I know what you were trying to accomplish with the apartment, with my income, with the guarantees, with every conversation we've had about money for the last several months." "Nadezhda." "I'm not finished. Still calm. Still level. I filed for divorce this morning. The petition is with the court. The apartment is my personal property acquired before our marriage, by deed of donation, sole ownership, not subject to marital division. You know this. I need you to gather your things and leave tonight." The room was very quiet. Igor's jaw was set. His eyes had gone to a different place, not hurt, not remorseful, but the cold, fast anger of a man whose plan has failed completely, and who is looking for someone to assign the failure to. "You had it all worked out," he said. "You and your father." "I protected myself," she said, "with his connections, his old favors, the suppliers, the investor. That's not coincidence." Her father's voice came from the armchair, quiet and without drama. "Prove it. 2 words. That's all. And I want you to sit with those 2 words for a second, because they are doing a lot of work." He wasn't bluffing. He was offering a genuine invitation. "Go ahead. Show us the evidence that any of this was manufactured." The suppliers made their own calls. The investor ran his own audit. The landlord did his own arithmetic. There was nothing to prove because there was nothing to find. Igor turned to look at him. Her father held his gaze without any expression at all, not challenging, just present. The offer was genuine, and they both knew it. Prove it, if you can. The suppliers had made their own decisions. The investor had commissioned his own audit. The landlord had done his own arithmetic. Every person who had moved away from Igor's business had done so based on real information that Igor himself had generated. No one had manufactured anything. No one had needed to. Igor looked away first. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, with nowhere to put himself. Then he said, with the last edge of bitterness he had available, "Fine," and walked to the bedroom. Nadezhda went to the living room. She sat with a book that she did not read. Her father remained in his armchair, unhurried, with the calm of a man who had been in rooms where difficult things happened and had long since learned that the only useful thing to do in such rooms is to stay and be steady. From the bedroom, the sounds of a life being packed, drawers opening and closing, the rattle of hangers, the click of a document folder being pulled from a desk drawer, the zip of a large bag. These were the ordinary sounds of 7 years departing not in anguish, not in ceremony, just in the practical language of things being removed from their place. Pay attention to what a man grabs when he is packing in a hurry. Clothes, documents, chargers, the razor from the bathroom, the things that are immediately useful. He did not take the framed photo from the shelf. He did not take the book he had been meaning to finish for 2 years. He took what a person takes when they are leaving for good and are no longer pretending otherwise. Irina Viktorovna arrived quietly, using the key her daughter had given her earlier in the day. She came in without knocking, set her coat on the hook by the door, and put the kettle on without asking. Then she sat next to Nadezhda on the couch and opened the book she had brought herself, and read it, or appeared to read it, in the comfortable silence of a woman who has decided that her job right now is simply to be in the room. The end of a marriage, it turns out, does not always look like what people expect. Sometimes it looks like this: an apartment in Moscow on a Tuesday evening, a man packing a bag in the bedroom, a woman sitting on the couch with an unread book, her mother quietly making tea, and her father in the armchair who has not moved and does not intend to. There are no speeches at the end of real things. There is just the thing ending. Igor came out of the bedroom with a large sports bag over his shoulder. He paused in the doorway of the living room and looked at Nadezhda. "You think you won," he said. "I think I kept what was mine," she said. "That's not winning. It's just the final count." He looked at her for another moment. Then he picked up his keys from the floor of the entry hall, the ones he had dropped days ago and hadn't bothered to pick up, and he left. The door closed behind him. Not a slam, a click, the precise, final sound of a door that has been pulled shut with intention. Nadezhda set the book down. Her father didn't move. Her mother came in with 3 cups of tea and set them on the coffee table, then sat back down. No one said anything. The building settled around them in its quiet evening noises. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's television, a car outside, the distant hum of the city. Her father said, "Is there bread?" Her mother went to check. There was bread. There was also some cheese and a bowl of tomatoes and the remains of a pot of soup. And they ate together at the kitchen table in the way of people who have no need to perform anything for each other. Simple food, ordinary talk, a conversation about nothing that was also a conversation about everything, because it said, "We are here, you are not alone, and the world continues." They talked about the city, about the autumn light, which in Moscow does a particular thing, in the late afternoon, gold and flat and almost horizontal, coming through the windows at an angle that makes everything look like the backdrop of an old painting. Her father said he had forgotten that. Her mother said she had not. They talked about the sea, about the house down south, about whether Nadezhda would come to visit in summer. She said she would. They did not talk about what had just happened. There was nothing left to say about it. It had been said. It was done. When her parents left that night, Nadezhda stood for a while in the apartment alone. It was quiet, a different quiet than it had been with Igor in it. Not the quiet of 2 people avoiding each other, not the quiet of accumulated unsaid things. Just quiet. The apartment's own natural silence, belonging to no one's tension, shaped by no one's absence. She was 30 years old and the apartment was hers. In the weeks that followed, the rest unfolded exactly as Arkady had said it would. The creditors, once it became clear that no external rescue was coming, stopped waiting their turn politely. One demanded immediate partial repayment of an outstanding balance. Another froze the next shipment until the overdue account was settled. 2 of the 4 stores ran out of inventory. No new stock arrived. The third tried to limp along with what it had. The 4th followed. The warehouse, billed at the new rate Igor could not meet, was vacated. He rented a truck and moved the remaining merchandise out himself, selling what he could at whatever price he could get, trying to convert boxes into rubles before the boxes became worthless. Vlada Soldatova resigned from the store. She did not give notice. She left a message with the manager. She did not respond to Igor's calls after that. Not once. The new man in her profile photo was still there, solid, well-dressed, entirely unbothered by anything happening in Igor's life. The last store closed in the second week. Not dramatically. It simply locked its doors on a Thursday and did not open on Friday. No announcement. No clearance sale. No farewell. Just a locked door on a Thursday morning, which is honestly a more dignified exit than the situation deserved. Igor wrote to Nadezhda several times. The first messages still had the tone of negotiation. Then they shifted to grievance. Then they went quiet. She responded only to what was legally necessary: court dates, document confirmations, the procedural details of the divorce. Nothing more. The court date came on a pale Thursday in late autumn. The judge was a woman of perhaps 50, businesslike and efficient, who had presided over enough dissolution hearings to move through the questions without theater. She asked whether both parties confirmed the irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. Both confirmed. She asked whether reconciliation had been considered. Both said it had not. The apartment was not listed among marital assets. There was no legal basis for it to be. The marital property was enumerated. Furniture, which remained with Nadezhda by agreement. The car, which passed to Igor. 7 years of shared life, itemized and settled in under 40 minutes. Back home in the States, people sometimes joke that divorce lawyers make more money than the couples who hired them. In Russia, when there are no minor children and no contested assets, and both parties agree on the fundamental facts, the court can be surprisingly direct. The system has its own problems, believe me, but in this particular kind of case it does not linger. When they walked out of the courthouse, Nadezhda stopped on the steps. The autumn sun was doing that Moscow thing present, luminous, producing light without warmth, honest in the way that only cool light can be. She turned her face up toward it for a moment, closed her eyes, felt the pale heat of it on her skin, thin but real. Her parents were a few steps behind her. They had given her the steps, her own space to stand in for a moment before the rest of the day continued. She thought, so this is what the first day looks like. Not a celebration, not a relief that floods the chest and makes you want to throw something in the air. Just this, the quiet, clear sense of a morning that belongs to you. No other agenda underneath it. No one else's emergency quietly running through the walls of your own life. Just the pale October sun and the city below, and the knowledge that whatever came next was going to be built on something solid and honest and hers. She turned back to her parents. Done, she said. Done, her mother said, and took her hand. Her father said nothing. He simply fell into step beside her as they walked down the courthouse stairs. Same pace, same straight back. Same unhurried walk. He had always had the walk of a man who knows where he is going and has no need to rush toward it. The same walk she had seen in the arrivals hall 5 weeks ago, when he had put his hand on her shoulder and said one word that changed everything. He had not called it revenge, then or at any point after. He had called it a lesson, but the lesson was never really for Igor. Igor, by all available evidence, was not a man who learned from what happened to him only from what he could prevent from happening to him. The lesson was for Nadezhda. It was, here is what it looks like when the truth is allowed to be visible. Here is what happens when you stop covering for someone. Here is what you were protecting, all this time, without knowing it needed protecting. The difference between revenge and protection is this. Revenge is about what happens to the other person. Protection is about what stays with you. He had been protecting her, that was all. Just that, cleanly. From the first moment he placed his hand on her shoulder in that arrivals hall and decided, without hesitation, that he was not about to let his daughter walk into that fire unprepared. They had coffee at a small place 2 blocks from the courthouse. Ordinary coffee. A table by the window. The Moscow street, going about its business outside. Her father ordered something with cheese. Her mother asked about the drive to the airport. They were flying back south that afternoon. Nadezhda said she would take them. She had already cleared her afternoon. They talked about the summer visit, about the garden her mother had finally gotten right after 2 years of trying, about a neighbor of theirs who had built a small dock and now spent every morning fishing without catching anything, and considering this a complete success. Normal things. The most necessary things. There is a particular kind of love that does not announce itself. It does not make speeches or require recognition. It simply shows up at an airport, on a Tuesday evening, on courthouse steps in October, and stands beside you at exactly the right distance, close enough that you feel it, far enough that you have room to be yourself. Nadezhda had been surrounded by that kind of love her whole life and had not always known to call it what it was. She knew now. She drove her parents to the airport that afternoon, helped with the bags, stood at the departure's door. Her mother held both her hands for a moment before going in, looked at her the way mothers look when they are trying to memorize something. "Come in July," she said. "July," Nadezhda agreed. Her father hugged her once, brief, solid, without ceremony, and then turned and walked through the door, straight back, even step, no looking back, because there was no need. Everything that needed to be said had been said, or had been understood without saying, which is the same thing, and sometimes better. She watched the door close behind them, stood there for a moment in the drop-off lane. Then she got back in the car. She did not take the highway home. She took the long way, through the center, past the wide Moscow boulevards and the old buildings with their layered histories, and the ordinary evening life of the city that had been running all around her story, without knowing anything about it. She drove with the windows cracked just slightly, enough to let in the October air. She thought about work tomorrow, a report she needed to finish, coffee she would make in the morning, the quiet of the apartment in the evening, which was now simply the apartment's own quiet, belonging to no one's tension. She thought about July. She thought, that is enough to think about right now. The rest could arrive when it arrived. She would be ready. She had learned, had proved to herself, in the longest 5 weeks of her adult life, that she knew how to wait, how to be still, how to see clearly when everything in you wants to look away, how to hold a line when someone is pushing against it. She had been practicing those things her whole career, behind a desk, with spreadsheets and reports. She just hadn't known until now that she was also practicing them for this. And here is the lesson I want to leave you with, because it is the one that stays with me longest from this story. The most dangerous thing a person can do for someone they love is to make it easy for that person to live a dishonest life. Every time Nadezhda explained away his behavior, she was doing him a kindness he had not earned and did not deserve, and costing herself something she had no business giving away. Protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices is not love. It is a loan they will never repay, taken from an account you cannot afford to deplete. The moment she stopped covering for him, the truth became visible. Not because anyone manufactured it, because they simply stepped out of the way and let it stand in its own light. That is the whole lesson. Step out of the way and let the truth stand. If this story moved something in you, if it made you think of someone you know, or something you've been explaining away for longer than you should, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your city, your state, wherever home is for you right now. And tell us what you're taking with you from this one. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the moment. There are stories on this channel that will stay with you for a long time. And I promise, it'll be worth every minute. I'll see you in the next one.